Welcome explorers today. Dive into this thrilling TTP narration of Ghosts in the Avalanche by Banancake, an ongoing fan-made book from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY.
Date, Standardized Human Time May 18, 2137. Chapter 8, Avalanche. The quiet interior of a cozy office is gently dimmed as a well-dressed man closes a set of blinds on a wide window, sealing out the harsh rays of the afternoon sun. He removes his glasses from his face and holds them in one hand while his other holds a small stack of papers. He squints as he paces in a small circle just behind his desk, putting the edge of the glasses frame to the corner of his lip as he reads over the document's contents. He sits down on a padded leather chair behind his large wooden desk. Its surface is clean and tidy. On the polished dark wood sits only the stack of documents, a keyboard and monitor, and a nameplate that reads, Isaac Raynor, Ph.D., in ornate, golden letters. A diploma in psychiatry, as well as one in neurology, decorates the cream-colored wall behind him. Raynor sighs as he rubs his temples. He runs a hand through his graying hair before placing his glasses back on his nose. The ticking of a clock on the wall is interrupted by a tone from the doctor's computer. Raynor sits up slightly as a woman's voice emanates from the device. Doctor, Andrea and Vivri are here. Raynor clears his throat before replying. Good, send them in, please. With a click, the heavy wooden door on the other side of the room swings open. Raynor stands. Did you get it? Andy sets down two rectangular containers on the desk, placing them upright. They're white, translucent boxes with small circular holes in the top. Apparently, there are two different kinds, so I got both. Raynor nods. Good. Excellent. But I've been told either will work, he mutters. He takes one of the boxes and marches it toward the door, handing it to his assistant outside before pacing back to his desk. It's on its way to the lab as we speak. He places his hands on the desk and leans over slightly. He exhales before his eyes land on Vivri, who is nervously standing behind Andy. He smiles. You must be Vivri. Yes. Nice to finally meet you, the Venmal stutters nervously. Pleasure's all mine, Raynor nods. You and your brother are the first Venmal I've met in person. Though, I guess Vikri and I haven't formally met just yet. How is he? Vivri asks nervously. He's calm now, if a little closed off. I'll stop by to check in on him shortly. He sits down, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. But until then, I was hoping to ask you two some questions. Andy and Vivri sit down as Raynor once again picks up the stack of papers on his desk. Now I have the police report here, and I've read over it a few times. Problem is, there isn't much information in here that I can use to help Vikri. My understanding of the incident is superficial. He straightens the papers before placing them to the side. So I was hoping you two could shed some light on the whole ordeal. I understand both of you were there. Andy shuffles slightly. I was only there during, the end of it. I was there the whole time, Vivri breathes, looking down slightly. Raynor places his hands on his desk, weaving them together, before leaning forward slightly. Can you tell me what happened leading up to everything? He asks in a soft, gentle voice. Vivri takes a breath before meeting the doctor's gaze. Well, that morning, he got a call from our mom. Memory transcription subject, Vikri, the honey badger. Date, Standardized Human Time May 18, 2137. For a moment, I debated just letting the call fall through. If it was something important, she could leave a message. But why open up a relay call? She definitely wanted to talk, but this was the worst time for it. Things with my family were always complicated after the battle, even with Vivri. The guilt I felt when I told them I wasn't coming home over our first call still threatened to crush me to this day. So many people, Venmal included, never got the chance to come home after that day. Ever again. It plainly highlighted how much things had changed. I felt safer on a predator's homeworld than in my own birthplace. I hesitated before taking a deep breath and accepting the call. A short tone resonated in my translator before a brief moment of silence followed. My mental faculties were far too diminished to think of what to say. I heard a Venlil voice. Vikri? I lay there, mouth open slightly as I tried to summon the energy to reply. I'd almost forgotten what she sounded like. I swallowed before answering. Yeah, hey Mom. How are you? I could hear a persistent hesitation in her tone. I stared blankly at the ceiling for a moment before answering. Been better, I sighed. Are you sick? I scanned the details of the ceiling fan as if I'd find the answer in them somewhere. Yeah. Kind of. She took a deep breath. Well, your doctor is still practicing here, maybe you should. We've talked about this, Mom. Many times, I interrupted. Son, Vivri mentioned you haven't been sleeping. I rubbed one of my eyes, squinting as a burning sensation swelled under my eyelid. And she would be correct, I huffed. Vikri, I didn't need to see her to know that tears were coming. Please. Just come home. I hate that I can't do anything for you. I sighed. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. But there are some things I need to sort out. I scratched behind one of my ears. Did you call because you heard I wasn't sleeping? A brief pause followed. Not quite. Your father is in the hospital again. This time it doesn't look good. Not at all. They're getting ready to send him into surgery, so I wanted you two to talk. In case I heard her take a ragged breath that stabbed through the delirium and into my heart somewhere. After a few seconds of silence, I took a deep breath. I thought he didn't want to talk to me anymore. I managed to talk him into it, she snickered. He loves you, Vikri. He's angry with you, sure, but he just wants you to come home. That's all any of us want. He won't admit it, but you get that stubbornness from him. It felt as though I got heavier. As if gravity was attempting to drown me in the murky abyss of what little consciousness I had left. I knew that I was far from prepared to talk to my father, even behind the safety of light years of distance. But I may never see him again. I could feel the first cracks forming, the small amounts of adrenaline leaking into my blood. I drew a ragged breath. All right. Put him on. The seconds that followed were agonizing. Somehow they were long enough for me to think back on my life before the battle. Growing up in the twilight, going to school every day with Vivri. Walking home under a glowing sky. I remembered counting down the days left before my dad would come home from space. All the stories he would tell us about the sights he'd seen on stations all over Venlil space. I could still remember the story about the time a gravity generator suddenly shut down during maintenance, conveniently around the same time one of their colleagues took a restroom break. He would always bring a model ship home for me whenever he was planetside. We'd spend hours putting those things together. I couldn't help but think how much simpler things could have been if I'd never left. Never ran off to fight a war we had no chance of winning. I rolled my head over to look at my desk. Pinned to the wall behind it was Carter's drawing. The bright green words were plainly visible from where I lay. Thank you for saving my home. My ears pressed back as I heard a steadily repeating tone over my translator. A heart monitor. My head snapped back toward the ceiling. I waited a few seconds. Dad? A weak voice replied. Vikri. Anxiety began burning in my chest. It seemed like the first real sensation I'd felt in hours. I opened my mouth but hesitated slightly before I spoke. How are you feeling? He took a pained, raspy breath. I've been better, he sighed coarsely. My lip trembled as my eyes wandered across the canvas of the ceiling. I took a sharp breath. I really am sorry, you know. I choked. For what? He asked plainly. For leaving, for not coming home, I quivered. I wish I could be there for you. For Mom. I heard him sigh as though he were right in front of me. You're sorry, he grunted. Yeah, I rasped. I never wanted to hurt you. I told you not to go, Vickery, he stated plainly. Now look what's happened to you. I know why you won't come home. I've known for a long time, but it broke my heart too much to accept it. My eyes narrowed as he continued. Because you died in that battle, he breathed. Tears started streaking down my face. What do you? They killed you, he breathed. The humans turned you into an animal. And that was it. A chaotic shuffling sounded from his side. My mom's voice resonated from my translator, slowly fading to nothing in my mind. Vickery, he doesn't mean it. He's just, in a lot of pain, right? Her voice finally drowned in the abyss. I hung up before sitting up in a flash. It felt like a crushing weight was bearing down on my ribcage as I struggled to take each breath. I noticed Vivri standing at the door, hugging the frame as she looked at me. Vickery? Are you all right? She stuttered, her ears pressed back with worry. I panted for a moment. I need to get out of here. I jumped up and marched past her, throwing my poncho over my shoulders as I hurried out the door. Vivri followed behind. Wait, where are you going? I wheezed as I fell onto my knees. My vision became dark and distorted. A painful ringing swelled in my ears before it all went silent at once. It felt like I had blacked out. Like I'd fallen asleep, yet I was still in control of my body. Dream and reality became indistinguishable. The setting around me became entangled with the shapes dancing in my vision. The sky darkened as the trees swayed in the wind in a shadowy blur. He's right. That's why I don't recognize myself. I died as soon as I pulled that trigger. The fog in my head seemed to manifest in reality, surrounding me in frigid, white mist. Vivri's voice echoed all around me as she called my name. Vickery! What are you doing? Just stay inside, I'm not losing you again. What are you talking about? A sound resonated from all around me, piercing through my very being from all directions. A thrumming that seemed to be coming from the air itself. A low drone that rose in volume with every passing second. Another sound emanated in the distance that sent chills down my spine. Howling. Lots of it, echoing from the fields all around me, whipping back and forth between the mountains on the horizon. I took rapid, wheezy breaths as I frantically looked around. My eyes landed on the barn. I sprinted inside, nearly falling over in the loose dirt, and ripped a stool out from under the workbench, sending tools clattering everywhere. I moved it over to a shelf and climbed on top of it. I reached up and grabbed a long, black case from the top shelf and clumsily undid the latches. Inside was a wood-furnished rifle. The same one I'd shot just days ago with Garrett. I sloppily ripped it out of the case and fumbled the magazine in before racking the bolt, making extra sure to watch the round enter the breech. I wouldn't make that mistake again. I marched outside, and the howling was now frighteningly close, just beyond the fog. Small snowflakes whipped around me in a vortex as the rumbling in my ears continued to rise, vibrating in my chest. Vivri called out once again, echoing as if I were surrounded by cliffs on all sides. Vickery! Stop! What are you doing? She pleaded. I told you to get inside, damn it! I shrieked. I heard rustling from beyond the fence beside me. I took a few steps back and leveled the rifle toward the tall grass. I trembled as I stood there, waiting for any movement. I watched as the grass parted closer and closer to the fence. I placed a digit on the trigger, on the verge of hyperventilating. The rumbling became so loud that it replaced any thought in my mind. I felt a cold pressure weighing down on my entire body as though I'd been swallowed by a torrent of snow and ice. Finally, a creature emerged from the grass. A huge, black wolf with dagger-like fangs bared at me as it snarled. I took one final step back and began to squeeze before Andy's voice cut through the fog like a bullet. Vic! You're dreaming. Time seemed to stand still. The air froze in place. The fog vanished. The morning sun warmed my face on the horizon as the gentle singing of birds replaced the avalanche. In front of me was Lucky, standing just on the other side of the road, looking directly at me. Not a murderous predator, not a nightmare, but the only good thing to come out of the nightmare. My best friend. An indescribable pain crackled through my mind. I was already depressing the trigger, and there was no way I could stop it. The best I could do in that split second was pull the muzzle of the rifle away from her as quickly as I could. I felt a kick to my shoulder, and the wind was knocked out of me as Andy collided with me at full force, tackling me to the ground. A loud pop rang in my ears as the rifle fell out of my paws. The last thing I saw before I hit the ground and blacked out was Lucky stumbling over in the grass. I sat upright in a hospital bed. A thin, white blanket was tucked snugly over my lower body. My ears swiveled periodically as the sound of voices and footsteps passed by outside the glass door to my room. I was lost in a sensation eerily similar to the one I felt the day I lost Tenga. Dejected. Numb. Depressed. At the time, I saw it as my mind protecting me. Containing those emotions somewhere deep inside my brain. What good would falling apart do me now? The only storm stirring in my head was worry. Worry that someone would walk through that threshold and tell me that I'd killed Lucky. What I would do if that were to happen, at this point, was a complete mystery to me. The strap binding my left paw to the bed frame indicated that no one else knew either. The sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway pulled me out of the mire of my thoughts. An older human man walked in, holding a clipboard and a potted flower in his hand. His eyes met mine as he set the items on the table beside me. He nodded and smiled politely. "Hey, Vikri. I'm Dr. Rayner, we met briefly if you remember." He turned around as he spoke and paced to the other side of the room, sliding the door closed behind him before rolling a chair from the other side of the room over to my bedside. He leaned forward. "Do you remember?" I studied his face briefly. "You look familiar." He nodded. "I'll take it," he chuckled. "You were in quite a state when you got here. I was worried you'd never calm down." I inhaled a sharp breath as if snagging it out of the air. "Do you know anything about Lucky?" Rayner clasped his hands together. "When I last called the vets, she was still in surgery." I looked down, taking a deep breath. Rayner rubbed his hands together before speaking. "I understand you're very worried about her." "I don't know what I'd do without her," I quivered. "Even if she lives, how can I choked before inhaling deeply. "How can I take her back, knowing I did that to her?" "I spoke with Andrea and Vivri," Rayner said softly. "And from what they've told me, you weren't quite yourself at the time." In the right side of my field of view, I could see him looking down at me for a few seconds before continuing. "You're very sick, Vikri, but we're gonna help you, all right? One day at a time." I didn't answer. I just didn't see how anyone here could help me. Rayner could talk all he wanted, but he wasn't talking me to sleep. If I couldn't sleep, I knew things would only get worse. And the only drugs that could help me were light years away. Rayner picked up the flower next to him. "And I do mean we, by the way. You have some very, very caring friends. Here." He extended the potted plant toward me as I slowly turned my head. It was a vibrant blue flower with a sturdy, deep red stem. Its 3 petals curled downward toward its roots, colored in a gradient of blue, a deep azure at the center faded to a bright cyan at the edges. The strong, rigid stem and leaves contrasted the delicate, paper-thin flower it supported. I gently took the flower in my paws as I studied it. "Look familiar?" the doctor asked, smiling slightly. "It's not from here," I muttered, slowly rotating it in my paws. Rayner chuckled. "You're right, it's native to Venlil Prime. But it happens to grow quite well in tundras and deserts here on Earth." He took off his glasses, wiping the lenses with the sleeve of his suit jacket. "I'm surprised you've never heard of it. From the bit of research I did on it, you and your sister are named after it." I looked up at him, perplexed. "What do you mean?" "Interestingly, it has 2 different names depending on where you get it. Sednia Vikri and Sednia Vivri. One's found near the dark side of the planet, and the other's found close to the deserts on the day side. He placed his glasses back on the bridge of his nose. There are some minor differences between them, but they're basically the exact same flower. Great name for twins. He leaned back in the chair. So it seems that, in our language, you and Vivre are twilight and dawn. He smiled. Pretty neat, huh? I stared at the flower. The pointed edges of its glowing petals brushed against my paw as I turned it some more. Yeah, I muttered. It does look a little familiar, but I can't remember why, I rasped, narrowing my eyes slightly. I guess it makes sense I'd be the darker side. Raynor pursed his lips, studying my eyes for a brief moment. Here on Earth, twilight is the beginning of a new day. He leaned forward. This flower is going to help you sleep. It contains compounds used in all kinds of Venlil sedatives. We're going to replicate one of them here. I have a colleague on Venlil Prime who's provided all the documentation we could need on it. I looked back up at him. Really? Where did you get this? Raynor chuckled. I didn't get it. I just found someone who happened to be growing it a few hours from here. Andrea's the one who went and got it. Andy? I stuttered. The doctor nodded. That's right. I believe her words when I told her this could help you were, say less. He smiled as he briefly flipped through the pages on the clipboard. You're very fortunate to have people who care so deeply for you, Vickery. The doctor stood up. First order of business is putting you to sleep. Of course, curing the direct cause of your insomnia would be the most effective way, but it seems we're out of time for that. Vivre tells me you haven't slept in at least 3 days. And from what my colleague on Venlil Prime tells me, you're risking brain damage already, and that episode was just the beginning. We have to get you to sleep as soon as possible. I sighed and placed my head back against the pillows. Raynor pursed his lips. I'll keep you up to date with Lucky. Until then, don't dwell on what happens after. Focus on getting better. That's the best thing you can do for her right now, he said softly before opening the glass door. Wait, what about the flower? I asked before he left. You can keep that one, Andy got too. That one said me a Vickery, by the way. Raynor replied as he walked out the door and closed it behind him. I was once again left in sterile silence. I stared blankly at the flower for what seemed like minutes. It was the first piece of home I'd seen since the battle. I wondered why my parents named us after it. That past seemed so far away, yet I was holding a piece of it in my paws. The irony was painful. To think that the last thing my father ever said to me might have been that I was dead to him, and yet he was the same one to name me after something so beautiful. Maybe, somewhere buried in all of that pain and anger, he really did care for me. I took a deep breath and gently placed the flower on the table next to me. I stared at it blankly as numbness overtook me once again. I was desperate to finally get some sleep, but I feared what might be dwelling there in my subconscious.